Hello, everybody. My name is Blake Skinner. I've personally been through divorce twice, and by the end of this informative speech, I would have really hoped to share with you the negative effects divorce can have on children. Divorce damages society. It consumes social and human capital. It substantially increases costs to taxpayers while diminishing the taxpaying portion of society. It diminishes children's future competence in all five of society's major tasks or institutions, such as family, school, religion, marketplace, and government, as said by Fagan and Churchill in their journal, The Effects of Divorce on Children. Some of the main points that I'm going to go over in this speech are going to be the statistics and history of divorce, what is most likely to happen to the child of divorce, and my personal story about going through divorce. So let's take a look at the first main point, statistics and history of divorce, to understand why/how divorce happens. In the 70s, 13% of American children had divorced parents. By 2003, it grew to 32%, and now the rate has grown to 55% of American children under the age of 18 have divorced parents. McGinnis said this in her journal, Marriage, Divorce, and Children. Marriage was such a big thing prior to the 60s. It still is today. But the difference now is that divorce prior to the 60s was really frowned upon, was really, a big no-no in a lot of circles. And after the 60s, it's really become, I don't want to say the social norm, but that's the way it's going towards. It's embraced, it's celebrated. And I think this has a lot to deal with why the divorce rate is skyrocketing, is because it's easy, it's easier, it's not as tough, and it's socially acceptable. Now let's talk about the children of divorce and what could possibly happen to them. Children of divorce are more subject to lower rates of educational success, 3 times more likely to abuse alcohol and drugs, and 5 times more likely to go through a divorce within their own relationship, as stated by McGinnis in her journal, Marriage, Divorce, and Children. There are many different types of divorce. You have ones that either remarry or they don't remarry, which creates its own dynamic. Some parents still like to co-parent, others want nothing to deal with each other. And then you have, I would say, the most volatile one, which is the parents that really cannot stand each other. The hate is still there. It's just dousing fuel into the fire, excuse me. And this is the most volatile, in my opinion, type of divorce. Now, things that children of divorce have to deal with that children of intact families necessarily won't think about or think negatively, as stated by Ahrens in her journal, Family Ties After Divorce, when asked whether the divorce of or a parent's remarriage was more difficult to cope with, more than half of the adult children reported that the divorce was most difficult, and 1/3 said that the remarriage was more difficult. This has to go with different dynamics that really get into why remarriage can be really hard on a kid, because it's introducing a whole new concept. You're pretty much introducing 2 new families to the kid, which can really mess with the kid's psychology as they grow up. And the other big thing that happens when you're a child of divorce is you're put right smack dab in the middle of everything. No matter how good your parents are to each other, there is always resentment, there is always emotion, because that is what divorce is. It's just a lot of emotion, whether that be hate, whether that be anger, whether that be a million different things. So you really get stuck right in the middle of that. Next, I want to talk about some of my own personal stories growing up in divorce that I had to go through, and some of my trials, and how it was for me growing up. So like I said in the introduction, I went through it twice. My mom got divorced from my dad right before I was born, and then they got remarried. Then they got divorced 8 months after I was born. So I really don't remember them ever being married. I just remember them being divorced. And it was a very volatile divorce. A lot of anger, a lot of hate, a lot of resentment. My mom really did not like my dad. My dad really did not like my mom. They both got remarried about 5 years after they got divorced. I was about 5 years old. Um, they both got remarried. Stepdad hated my dad. Stepmom hated my mom. So it created a lot of conflict. And it really put me in the middle of everything. Feeling like I was an object, feeling like I was just money because my mom needed child support to pay for sports or to get my hair cut, and my dad didn't want to pay it because my mom was remarried. So there was all this, push and pull back and forth, and it really made me feel like crap. It made me feel like, one, they didn't want me. Two, why was I here? If they're just gonna bicker over these little things, what's the point of me being around? When I was younger, I had some thoughts, wrote a few suicidal notes. Obviously, never went through with it. But looking at it back now that I'm older and now that I'm married and I have 2 kids with the third one on the way, first off, I will never ever put my kids through divorce. I think there's steps that you can take to get past that. And two, it's really allowed me to grow as a man, and it really allowed me to become who I am. And I think without my divorce that I went through, I wouldn't be the guy I am today, if that makes any sense. But I would not wish the type of divorce I went through upon my worst enemies. So in conclusion, let's just wrap a little bit of all this up and talk about, the negatives about it, and, how divorce isn't always the answer. Sometimes it might be, but there's a lot of variables that you have to take into place. All in all, divorce isn't for everybody, but I don't think it should be the number one option either. I think there are steps that you should take. There are steps to building a healthy relationship with your significant other, because once you get divorced, it's not just the mom and the dad that have to take the brute force of it. There's a lot of other variables that, get hit by the shrapnel that happens. So this speech is just to inform people that, divorce in itself is just not about the mom and the dad. It really comes down to the mom and the dad, but then the kid really takes the brunt end of it all because they're still developing their brain and they're still doing things such as that nature. So before you get divorced, I would strongly urge taking other steps to see if you can work it out. Thank you.